Hey everybody, Andrew Flushy here. I'm an attorney in Virginia, and I'm going to do a little live video today to talk to you about the different issues with forced vaccinations. I want to make this an interactive live video, so I encourage some comments and feedback, and let's talk about it. Let's have a discussion. Please share this video on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, wherever you're at, so people can hopefully join in and join the discussion. And hopefully everybody can see me and hear me well. So again, I'm an attorney in Virginia. My YouTube channel, where I do a lot of video work, we focus on a lot of police interaction because I'm a DUI, traffic defense attorney. But primarily what I do is I really work on freedom, essentially being sort of the defense between the government and your liberties and your freedom. And so with all the COVID restrictions, the different rules and requirements they've tried to add onto us, I really see them as restricting our liberty and our freedoms. And so I really think that is part of my channel and part of my duty as an attorney to help educate people on what's happening and what your options are, frankly. So with all that said, the key question today is, can the government compel vaccinations? Can they? So that's really the question we're going to get to. It looks like we have a comment. And yes, look, we have a comment right here. Charlie, yeah, absolutely. This is a live broadcast. So please feel free to interact, ask questions if you have it. I'm going to try to answer questions as they come along, and hopefully we can have a discussion here. All right, so can the government compel you to be vaccinated for a virus like COVID-19? And what can you do about it if they do try to compel you? That's the questions we're going to get into here. Hope everybody can hear me well. I've got a new setup here, so if you can't, please let me know. I can try to get a little closer to the microphone, but not sure how I would do that. So anyway, so we've all seen some of the headlines that are coming along. So we see here, USA Today's headline. This came out a couple of weeks ago. It was an opinion piece they published about making vaccinations mandatory for everybody, and basically arguing that it's the patriotic thing to do for everybody to be vaccinated, and we have to require it. It has to be mandatory. And of course, this came out before any governments really were saying, in the United States anyway, any governments were really saying we're going to mandate a COVID-19 vaccination. USA Today was already publishing an opinion piece saying that we should do it. New Zealand, I believe Australia, a couple different governments around the world have suggested we should have mandatory forced vaccinations for COVID. That's already been taking place. And then shortly after the USA Today story popped, we had this story from right here in Virginia. This is one reason I think this is a very relevant topic for Virginia lawyers and Virginia residents and citizens to talk about. We have our own health commissioner stating, going on video on the record, stating that if he's health commissioner and there is a COVID-19 vaccination that's been approved and safe and reliable, that he will mandate a COVID-19 vaccination. Now, our governor, Governor Northam, is a Democrat, and he, after the health commissioner made this statement on this interview, the governor, Northam, actually backpedaled and said, no, we're not going to make it mandatory. We're not going to make it mandatory. So he kind of backpedaled a lot. However, we do have the health commissioner on record saying that it should be mandatory. So that's the big question is it going to be mandatory or is it not? And of course, Virginia is only one state in the union. There's 50 states, of course. Every governor would be able to kind of decide on their own, essentially, how, whether we're going to have a vaccine that's mandatory for everybody. Before we go on, please remember to subscribe. I really appreciate subscribe or follow on Twitter or share this on Facebook. It really helps out if you do that. So let's look at kind of what the state of the law is in Virginia. So the big question is, what could you do about this? Well, the first thing is you got to learn what your state's law is. I'm only a Virginia lawyer, so I can't go into all the specifics about what the law would be in every state because every state's different. If you're not familiar, the United States, we are a republic. So every state has their own laws that govern most things. So basically the state level is where most of the laws take place, such as education, health, things like that. And of course, primary safety, like murder. Most of the times if you were to commit a murder, you'd be violating state law, not federal law and not some local ordinance. It's all, most things are regulated on the state level. The federal government can regulate some things. However, of course, what I believe the U.S. Constitution says is that the federal government has very limited, very, very specific powers only for certain things. Now, that's been kind of abused, and our Constitution doesn't, frankly, mean a whole lot these days, unfortunately. But where a forced vaccination would likely come from would likely be the state level. Just like you see all these, all the coronavirus lockdowns and whatnot, they took place on a state level. Most of the things that were done with the stay-at-home orders and the lockdowns and all the current restrictions we're still living under, those did not come from the federal level, and most of them didn't come from a local county or city level. It's usually from the state level. So where would a vaccine mandate come from? It would probably come from the state level. So that's where you need to look at your state and what your state's laws are on this regard. So let's look at Virginia real quick. I've got the current statute here, so you can look at it. So Virginia's statute, essentially one of the statutes that would be relevant for forced vaccination is Virginia Code 32-148, powers of commissioner in an epidemic. And this is the health commissioner. This is in the health code. So it says basically that the commissioner is allowed, nothing in this article. So basically they're not prohibiting the commissioner from requiring a vaccine, in a time of pandemic. Of course, we're in a time of pandemic, which means the health commissioner could require a vaccine. The only exception that's allowed under this statute is if it's detrimental, whose health, basically if the vaccine would be detrimental to the health of the person as certified in writing by a licensed physician. So you'd have to have some physician certify in writing that you cannot take the vaccine due to your health. Not simply because you don't want to, or not because you have religious objections to vaccines, or perhaps not because you have religious objections to the way the vaccine was created or what went into the vaccine. The only exception under current Virginia law is if you could actually have a doctor sign in writing saying that it would be detrimental to your health. So that's the current law. The legislature is actually in session right now on a special session to talk about police reform and some coronavirus stuff. And so there's a bill that was proposed to modify 32-1-48 to actually allow exemptions on religious grounds. So you note I highlighted in green the change in the law that the bill was trying to do. And it says a person who objects to the administration of such vaccine on religious grounds. So basically the legislature evaluated this and tabled it. There was another similar bill that would have allowed objections on religious grounds and also on grounds based on the contents of the vaccine. So for some people who may not know, some vaccines are actually made via essentially aborted babies. So they use old fetal aborted baby parts essentially to produce the vaccines. It's very technical and it's a little more than the scope of this video, but a lot of people, including myself, have objections to some vaccines based on the content, how they're made, how they're cultured, and basically how the vaccines are produced. And so this bill that was proposed would have allowed conscientious objectors to not take a vaccine even in time of epidemic. However, the bill failed. So the current Virginia law stands, at least currently, that would allow the commissioner to mandate a vaccine. So what does all this boil down to is this. Essentially, there's three things you can do about a forced vaccination. The first thing is you can read the law, you can know what your state's law does allow or doesn't allow. Is there an exception? Is there some kind of provision where you can step aside and not have to take a forced vaccination? So in Virginia, it would essentially require a doctor signing in writing that it would be detrimental to your health. So that's something you may want to talk to your doctor about if you live in Virginia. The second thing you can do is to vote. And I'm trying not to be too political. I'm trying to focus on the law here in this video and our freedom. But if you notice, essentially the laws that are passed at the state level are what's controlling here. And the governors are what's been controlling us this whole year, basically. And so if you don't like things that are happening, you need to vote and maybe vote differently than you voted in the past. If you do like what's going on with things the governor is doing, then I suppose you keep voting the way you voted. But it's very important to vote. All politics is local, so it starts at the local level, goes up to the state level, and frankly, the federal government, those positions are very important, but in some ways they are much less important than state and local elections. So the voter turnout rate for state and local elections is abysmal. So if you have not voted in the past, you definitely need to take interest, learn about the candidates, and vote. It's very important. The third thing you can do if you're worried about forced immunizations and forced vaccinations is frankly to move. One of the beautiful things about the United States is we have multiple states. One of the whole concepts of having these united states, every state has their own government that regulates most things, is that each state could sort of be a experiment ground and kind of do things their own way, what their people thought was appropriate, and see how it goes, frankly, and see what works best. That's kind of the whole idea. Is it's almost this grand experiment in governance to try to make sure, try to figure out what's the best for the people and for the economy and for safety and health and religion and all these different factors the government should take into account. And so if you don't like what's happening, move to a different state. And frankly, that's something we may be looking at in Virginia. Virginia's turned a lot of corners, and it may be time to start thinking about where else we might could go. Sadly, right now in the United States, there may not be a whole lot of places to go that are much different, but we'll have to see how these forced vaccinations turn out. So that's kind of the basics we want to talk about. It looks like we have a comment. So Jason Beam is saying, well, religious grounds equals any grounds. And that's certainly one critique of allowing a religious exemption for a vaccine, is that anyone could claim religious exemption. I would suggest, though, that that's kind of the point. We're not going to get into judging, is your religious exemption valid or not? But people do have religious exemptions, and so ignoring them, I think, is a problem. So obviously, reasonable minds can disagree on some of these things. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. I'd be happy to hang out for just another minute, see if anybody has any more questions or comments. I hope everybody's enjoyed the live stream. I do hope you'll share it so your friends can check it out. And please be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow me on Twitter, and give us a like and follow on Facebook. It really helps out. If you want to reach me, feel free to email me at andrew@andrewflucci.com or hit me up on Twitter at @aflucci. I hope everybody has a great day. Thanks for tuning in.